the age of legends, when the gods still whispered their secrets to men, the kingdom of Britain was a land of warring lords and fractured destinies. The realm, though vast and full of promise, was torn apart by bloodshed, for the great King Uther Pendragon had long sought to unite the land under one rule. Yet, despite his might and the loyalty of his knights, his heart was ensnared by a desire that would change the fate of Britain forever. Igraine, the wife of Duke Gorlois of Cornwall, was said to be the fairest of all women, her beauty woven from the light of the moon and the song of the sea. Uther, consumed by a love both forbidden and relentless, sought to claim her as his own. But Igraine was bound to Gorlois, a lord of great pride and strength, who would never surrender his wife to another. The feud between Uther and Gorlois escalated into war, and it was then that the great enchanter Merlin, the last of the ancient druids, stepped forth to shape the course of destiny. "Your desire is your doom, Uther Pendragon," Merlin warned, his voice as deep as the roots of the earth. "Yet, if fate wills it, from this union shall be born the one who will mend this broken land." Desperate and blind to reason, Uther struck a dark bargain with Merlin. By sorcery, the enchanter cloaked Uther in the likeness of Gorlois, allowing him to enter Tintagel Castle and lie with Igraine. That very night, as storms raged over the cliffs and the sea howled in protest, a child was conceived, one who would one day be crowned the greatest king the world had ever known. But fate is cruel in its demands. Gorlois fell in battle that same night, and Igraine, believing her husband victorious, welcomed Uther as her lord. When she learned the truth, her heart wept, but by then, the course had been set. In due time, she bore a son, a child of destiny, but as part of the bargain, the boy was taken from her arms and placed in the care of Sir Ector, a noble knight sworn to secrecy. Thus, the babe who will be king was cast into the shadows, his lineage unknown, his destiny waiting to be revealed. The boy grew under the name of Arthur, believing himself the son of Sir Ector, a noble knight of good heart but little renown. Raised alongside Sir Ector's own son, Kay, Arthur knew nothing of the blood that flowed through his veins, nor the destiny that awaited him. He spent his days in the rolling fields, learning the ways of the sword, tending to horses, and listening to the old songs of warriors past. Merlin, ever watchful from the shadows, had not abandoned him. The old enchanter often visited Arthur in disguise, guiding him with riddles and wisdom hidden within lessons of nature. "Strength alone does not make a king," Merlin would say as they walked through the mist-laden forests. "A true ruler must have wisdom, humility, and a heart unyielding in its duty." But Arthur was still a boy, and he did not yet grasp the weight of these words. He dreamed only of knighthood, of proving himself in battle, and of winning honor in the grand tournaments held by the great lords of the land. Yet beyond the quiet life of the boy, Britain groaned beneath the weight of uncertainty. Uther Pendragon had died without a known heir, and the throne lay empty. Lords and warlords alike vied for power, each claiming the right to rule, plunging the land into greater strife. The realm needed a king, but none could rise to unite it. It was then that a miracle was revealed. On the morning of the winter solstice, as the sun barely touched the frost-ridden earth, the people of London awoke to behold a wondrous sight. In the courtyard of the great cathedral, a magnificent sword stood embedded in the stone, its hilt adorned with runes of ancient power. Upon its gleaming steel, an inscription read, "Whoso pulleth out this sword from the stone and anvil is a true-born king of Britain." Word of the sword spread like wildfire, and knights, barons, and lords came from every corner of the land to claim it. One by one, they grasped the hilt, straining with all their might, but the sword remained unmoved. Days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, yet no man could loosen the blade from its stone prison. Hope dwindled, and war loomed ever closer. Then came the day of the great tournament. Sir Ector, now an aging but respected knight, took his son Kay to compete among the finest warriors of the realm. Arthur, still no more than a squire, carried Kay's armor and tended to his horse, watching from the shadows as knights clashed in combat. It was a grand spectacle, but fate had woven a different thread for Arthur that day. For in the chaos of the tournament, Kay's sword was lost, and the young knight, unwilling to forfeit, commanded Arthur to fetch him another. Arthur ran through the empty streets, searching in vain for a blacksmith, but none were to be found. Then, as though drawn by an unseen force, he came upon the great cathedral, and there, standing in the morning light, was the sword and the stone. Without hesitation, Arthur stepped forward and grasped the hilt. A strange warmth spread through his fingers, a deep hum resonating from the steel, as if the sword itself recognized him. With a single pull, the blade slid free as effortlessly as if it had rested in water. Silence fell over the city. Those who had gathered turned, their eyes widening in disbelief. The boy, this mere squire, held aloft the sword that no man had been able to claim. A murmur spread through the crowd, turning into cries of astonishment. Sir Ector and Kay arrived, their faces pale as Arthur presented the sword. "It was the only one I could find," Arthur said simply, but the lords knew better. The boy had done what the greatest warriors of the land could not. He had drawn the sword from the stone, and in that moment, Arthur's fate was sealed. Yet not all rejoiced at the revelation. Many of the great lords refused to accept that a mere squire could be their king. They scoffed, saying it was trickery, that the boy was unworthy, and that the sword must have been loosened by some unseen force. But Merlin, who had remained hidden until now, stepped forth from the gathering and spoke. "Deny him if you will," the old enchanter said, his voice echoing through the square, "but the will of the gods cannot be undone. Arthur is the son of Uther Pendragon, the rightful heir to the throne of Britain." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some lords fell silent, while others, filled with rage and jealousy, still refused to yield. "Then let him prove himself," one of them roared. So it was that Arthur was tested again. The sword was returned to the stone, and the lords, one by one, attempted once more to pull it free. Again, none could move it. Arthur stepped forward. He wrapped his fingers around the hilt, and once more, the sword slid forth with ease. One by one, those who had doubted him bent the knee. Arthur was crowned in the great halls of Camelot, and there, beneath the banners of old and new, he swore an oath to his people. "I shall be a king of justice, of honor, and of peace. I shall forge a kingdom where might shall serve right, and where all who dwell within these lands shall live without fear. This I swear before the gods and all who stand witness." And so, the boy who had once been a nameless squire became King Arthur, the once and future king. But though he had claimed the throne, his trials had only just begun. Arthur reigned over Britain with wisdom and strength, forging the legendary Knights of the Round Table and establishing Camelot as the heart of justice. Under his rule, the land flourished, and the old rivalries between lords were tamed under a banner of unity. With Excalibur in his hand and Merlin as his guide, Arthur became the greatest king Britain had ever known. Yet, as all great myths teach, even the mightiest must one day fall. Darkness crept into the heart of Camelot, not from an army beyond the kingdom's borders, but from within. Morgana, Arthur's half-sister, seething with envy, mastering sorcery to undo the king she despised. In the shadows, she whispered poison into the ears of those who would listen, and through deception, she orchestrated the kingdom's downfall. But the gravest betrayal came from Mordred, Arthur's own son, born of an ill-fated union, raised in secrecy and twisted by resentment. War descended upon Camelot in its final days. Mordred, now a warrior with a legion behind him, led an uprising against his father. The knights who had once sworn their loyalty to Arthur now stood divided, torn between duty and ambition. The land that had once flourished under his reign was soaked in blood as brother fought against brother, and the great kingdom teetered on the edge of ruin. The final battle was waged upon the fields of Camelot, where Arthur and Mordred met for the last time. The clash of steel rang through the air, and warriors fell like autumn leaves. Arthur, though wounded, fought with the strength of a king whose destiny was written in the stars. With one final stroke of Excalibur, he struck down Mordred, but not before his son drove a spear into his side. As the battle waned and the remnants of his once glorious army stood in mourning, Arthur, knowing his time had come, commanded his last knight, Sir Bedivere, to return Excalibur to the Lady of the Lake. With great reluctance, Bedivere cast the sacred sword into the water, where a hand emerged from the depths, catching the blade before vanishing beneath the waves. Arthur, weakened but resolute, was carried to the shores of Avalon, where three robed figures awaited him in a black barge. As the mist rose, shrouding the king from sight, a voice echoed through time, a whisper carried by the wind. One day, in Britain's greatest hour of need, the once and future king shall rise again. And so ended the reign of King Arthur, not in defeat, but in legend. His story, immortalized in song and tale, would endure for all eternity, a beacon of hope in the hearts of those who long for the return of Camelot.